The year is 1969. At the invitation of the museum director, a pair of artists took huge swaths of fabric and completely wrapped the Chicago Museum of Contemporary Art while it was open. This was panned by the public, and the fire department demanded the fabric be taken down. It remained. The artists, Christo and Jeanne-Claude, went on to wrap the walkways in Kansas City's Luce Park, surround 11 islands near Miami in pink floating fabric, wrap the Ponneuf Bridge in Paris. The list goes on, as does the legacy of these ambitious, innovative artists. Welcome to Art Bytes, a podcast from the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, where we take you beyond the art on the walls and into the stories of the artists and the ideas behind them. I'm your host, Kathleen Layton. We're coming to you today from a loft building in Soho, the same building where Christo and Jeanne-Claude rented the top 2 floors as immigrants when they moved to New York in 1964. They eventually purchased the building and lived and worked here until they passed. Jonathan Henery is joining us. As Jeanne-Claude's nephew, Jonathan worked with Christo and his aunt for decades, collaborating on many catalogs and exhibitions, helping with various installations, and he continues to manage Christo's office today and sits on the board of the Christo and Jeanne-Claude Foundation. Thank you, Jonathan, for inviting us here today.
Welcome.
Tell me about growing up as the nephew of a famous artist, Jeanne-Claude, who was one half of a powerful and pretty controversial artistic duo.
It's quite fun. As a young boy in school, my mother, being Jeanne-Claude's sister, would go to these projects, and sometimes they took me as a less than 1-year-old to see the Valley Curtain in 1972 in Rifle, Colorado. Don't remember it very well, but there are nice photos for proof of lots of orange fabric behind a little toddler or baby. They often my parents went to a lot of those projects without me, obviously, when my sister and I were in school, but they came back with cool souvenirs from the surrounded islands, and I was the only one in the 5th grade with a pink and black Surrounded Islands t-shirt, and nobody knew what that was. Later, I was, being Jeanne-Claude, my dear aunt, and my sister's godmother, we got to have quite a few beautiful artworks in our home, which was quite fortunate when you have aunt and uncles as artists. And that's a lot of how my childhood went, visiting them here in this very building, 7 years old, 8 years old, and being very careful, not knowing what was art and what wasn't.
You never know.
You never know, especially with Christo and Jeanne-Claude and as a young child.
So when did you first realize the enormity of this? Was there a moment, or was it just a gradual realization?
It was kind of gradual. I worked a little bit with them part-time in the summers before I had regular jobs in the 80s. But it was really in the 90s when I was in college in New York City. Jeanne-Claude asked me to fly with them to California to do a life-size test for the umbrellas just outside of Los Angeles on the Tajon Ranch. And then you really saw what was going on, because now I was there. I could see what was going to be built, and I could see the process unfolding before my eyes. And the amount of respect and love of the people that worked with them, and they were professionals, it opened my eyes quite a bit.
That must have been a really amazing moment for you.
It was actually quite attractive too. It was because I got to know my aunt and uncle much better, spending day and night with them for a week out in California, working in the hot sun, and really build my relationship with them that endured for many decades after that.
Is that when you really started working with them?
No, not really, because I was still in college and I had to finish college. And I was probably only in my 2nd year or 3rd year then. And after college, I worked sometimes in the summer with them because I was a teacher. And you have a lot of time off in the summer as a teacher, and you don't get paid a lot as a new teacher. So I worked with them in the summers of 93 and 94 and 95. And in the fall of 96, I asked Jeanne-Claude if she would like me to work full-time. And I could have one job instead of 2 or 3, as a lot of young people do. And since then, I have been solely employed by Christo and Jeanne-Claude.
Even today. And we are in, as we said, the space where they lived and worked for
Right.
so many years.
And where I worked for many years.
And still continue to work.
Right.
So there are sketches and plans for installations surrounding us right now. So tell us about their process.
There are 2 ways that they came about to envision their temporary installations, which they called projects. because they really were projects. They were either they had an idea to do something and they had to find a place to do it, or they had an item or a place that they wanted to intervene upon and then figure out what they want to do and then get permission to do either of those two ideas. If I can go for more into detail with that. For instance, in Central Park, there was a project realized in 2005. They called it the Gates. They wanted to do a project in Central Park. They didn't have to find Central Park. They didn't have to scout for Central Park. It was there. They had to walk around Central Park and mark on a map where the gates would be, but they knew where they were going to do the project.
Were these going to be fabric gates?
They were poles with fabric hanging from the top.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a temporary project of 7,503 of these gates over 23 miles of walkways throughout the north, south, east, and west, the entirety of the park where it was feasible to use the walkways.
They always encountered lots of conversation among city councils and things for the different areas that they would go to. Can you tell us about, was that a frustration or was that just part of the job?
Both. It was really this. I mean, Christo would explain that to me that it was really as frustrating as it would be sometimes to have to talk so much, because he really just wanted to be an artist. He didn't like to talk as much. But by talking to people and by having debates among community boards, mayors, city councils, parliaments, prime ministers, mayors, you make this work of art far more important, and it elevates it into the public sphere and into the public eye in a way that if it were easy to do, it would not.
Well, in Kansas City, Luce Park was wrapped, and I know that they asked people from the public to just come and help the project, and people still talk about that today because it really affected them. They were involved.
This is really important. These people that they met throughout their lives and all these little chapters of their lives, these different projects, became part of their family, and they followed with them because they really endeared to people in a way. After working together with Christo and Jeanne-Claude and their team, they found them attractive. They found the way they worked in freedom and independence as artists very attractive. And that's why Christo and Jeanne-Claude maintained such close relationships in places like Kansas City till the end of their lives.
And that was really important for them to remain free as artists. Isn't that right?
That's everything. That was really everything. I mean, Christo in particular, being educated in a Marxist system in communist Bulgaria, which was the most Marxist, the most Stalinist of all the Eastern Bloc nations, very tough place to be creative and free. So the moment he had the chance to leave, he took it, went to visit family in Prague in 1957, and he never returned to Bulgaria the rest of his life. And for the rest of his life, he wanted to work in artistic freedom. And that's how it was very appealing to Jeanne-Claude as a young debutante in Paris later. But really, it was Christo's communist upbringing that made him push so hard to be free as an artist.
What were they like just as human beings, as your aunt and uncle? What personally? You must have a million stories.
I won't give you a million, but they were first and foremost madly in love. Mm-hmm. A beautiful couple.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As evidenced by the many, many photos that are still on the walls here.
They were absolutely endearing and charming. And I, was privileged to be alone with them many times in many strange places, hotels and airports around the globe. But they walked hand in hand, from their 20s through their 70s when she died. They were first that. And Jeanne-Claude even told me and everyone she knew that she became an artist, that she joined Christo in his career as an artist purely out of love for Christo. Lucky for him, too, because without the two of them together, I don't think we would have seen in the art world what we saw over these past few decades.
It's so rare, that combination of personalities, and when they link up romantically and also professionally, sparks fly.
Yes, they were utterly devoted to each other and to their work. I don't know what came first, probably them first. You connect physically in one way and then forever. They're even born on the same day as two Gemini, and they sort of like twins is the way they referred to themselves.
They never wanted to use art dealers to sell their work. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, they did work to the end of their lives with many dealers, but they never had the traditional gallery artist representation.
That was brand new for artists at that time.
Yeah.
That was pretty groundbreaking.
Right, and quite difficult, too. But there are advantages to working with a gallery. The gallery will pay you a salary and will just get all your work. They didn't work like that, so that they actually ended up having a lot of work at the end of their lives. They ended up buying back their own work, which a gallery might not have done in the same way. And they maintain to this day. We have a lot of the galleries with whom we work and we're friendly with were people that they worked with. And they did bring collectors to the studio where you are today. And they had exhibitions around the world, but never an exclusive relationship with any gallery.
I know they started wrapping very small objects like bottles and cans, and then they got a little more ambitious. They wrapped a Volkswagen. How did the leap then occur to them wrapping enormous things like Ponteneuf or Loose Park or islands in Miami?
It is a big leap, Kathleen, absolutely. When Christo was still a student at the Fine Arts Academy in Sofia, art students there had to go out and advise the farmers how to put a tractor to look nice near the Orient Express, or where to stack their bale to make things look nice for foreigners traveling through the country on the train. So he had an idea of how to work in public spaces, but this was not for him. This was propaganda art. In the early 60s, Christo was in Paris with Jeanne-Claude, and he had an idea, and he drew a sketch to wrap a public building. This is very early on, before they ever thought they could. And he was making these works like wrapped cans and little packages, wrapped bottles. And he photomontaged with a photographer, of course, the Arc de Triomphe. And in front of it was covered with an image of one of his packages. And that was his first idea to show a public building wrapped. There were a few others, and he was thinking to do, it could be a parliament, could be a school, could be a prison, but it had to be a public building. He wrote this all in French and sort of a typical 1960s artist manifesto type of document. And it evolved from there. Now, if you think about the big projects that are hard to do, like the wrapped Reichstag, which is politically one of the most significant projects because they were permitted to wrap the parliament of a nation. At the time, it wasn't being used as the parliament, but it was still a highly significant structure in the heart of Berlin. That project started in the Cold War in 1971 when they first thought of doing it. So it had to change. The politics had to change for decades. Many prime ministers, many presidents, the reunification of Germany, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the plans to move the capital back to Berlin, and then they got permission to do the project.
How did they keep going? What kind of passion do you have to keep going through all of those different things that happen that seem to be roadblocks, but they were not roadblocks to Christo and Jeanne-Claude?
They were quite tenacious, and many authors have asked the same question, that it was really a matter of passion. This was quoted by Bert Chernow in their biography, but he actually wanted to name the book A Matter of Passion, but not a matter of patience, but a matter of passion. If they really wanted to do something, they would try again and try again and try again. This didn't happen for every project that they had. Sometimes they just lost interest. Okay, we're never going to wrap number 1 Times Square, and they gave up on it in 1968.
And wasn't the Colorado River the same type of thing?
The project for the Arkansas River in southern Colorado was permitted. They put a huge amount of effort in. They spent over $13 million of their own money selling artworks that they own to pay for an environmental impact statement, all this engineering to figure out how to do it. And it got permission in 2011, shortly after Jeanne-Claude passed, and was immediately challenged in federal and state court. And we won every single time. I say we because I was very much part of that organization in those days. And that project meant a lot to us as a family and as a team. And we kept at it. Even though it was being challenged, we were never stopped. But we could not allow Christo to go ahead to start building the project while it was in federal appellate court.
What kinds of things did you learn from them? Like just even that experience of seeing their tenacity and seeing their passion. Do you think that changed you in any way?
They changed me in a lot of ways. For certain, they opened me up in a way. I got to see the world in a totally different way, in a much more open way, in a much larger way. Being that I've never lived anywhere other than in New York my entire life. And they traveled. Christo left his home, his family, never came back. It's a very different way of looking at the world when you're like that, when you're semi-nomadic in a way. Remember, even Christo didn't have a state, was stateless for a little while before he could get his U.S. citizenship. It took him decades to acquire that. So I got to see the world from a very big way and see how other things that you think of are maybe small and not as important, but then they opened up the world to see art in a completely new way, to see people in a new way, see places and borders and boundaries. And the world became smaller in a way because everything became much more connected through seeing how they saw the world.
They've relied on the funding of their work through the sales of sketches and drawings, and they never went off that path the whole time, their whole career. What did you think about that? Did you ever think, gee, if they would just like raise money some other way or involve the public in that type of way of taking donations or something like that? But that wasn't what they were about.
Right. And it's for more than one reason. As I mentioned earlier, artistic freedom is really important. And we have Americans have sayings like, if I'm paying, I'm saying. Mm-hmm. That's a New York thing.
Not just New York, no.
Right. And by paying for it yourself, you can do it your way. No one's telling you when, where, what color. It's too small, it's too big, move it to the left. This was absolutely never going to happen for them. They cared too much about their work. Just like a musical composer would be the same way. If someone told them, no, could you put it in D instead of E flat? Absolutely not, I'm leaving. It would be the same. And they were like that. They cared too much about their work and the integrity. It had to be self-funded in order to be free and to be genuine. Nothing wrong with artists who get commissioned to do work.
Sure. Because
this is a beautiful way to get art into more and more spaces. Mm-hmm. Universities who commission work, cities, towns, corporations who commission beautiful sculptures for their grounds. I love that they do that, but what they're doing is they're buying a work of art. These temporary installations can't be bought and they can't be owned because they are in fact temporary and they'll go away in a few weeks, as they all did, and that's why they're not there anymore. So there's a big difference. When you can't own something, it's totally free.
And freedom was really the foundational feeling of both of them. That was really what drove them. They wanted to be free.
Yes, they wanted to be free to make their work as beautiful in exactly the way they wanted to do it.
Did they talk about what they wanted the public to take away from their work?
They did not. They loved to leave that to other people to say. There are lots of very smart critics and art historians with whom they were friendly over the decades. And Christo was very diplomatic and says, any interpretation of my work is valid.
Even if someone didn't like it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that was super important to them, right? There are documentary films about many of these projects, and there are public hearings which were filmed. Mm-hmm. A lot of these were done by the Maisels brothers, who are also long deceased now. And you'll see these public hearings, and they're almost insulting some of the critiques of artworks that don't even exist. This is just proposed, and they're being critiqued. Can you imagine artists having their work so heavily critiqued in the public sphere, and it doesn't yet exist in front of your eyes?
It's amazing what you'll hear from the public, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you know what their most satisfying work might have been?
This has been asked, but not very well answered. They treated each of their major artworks as a child that they would rear from the beginning, from conception to, say, graduation. And they never were able to, they would never tell you which was their favorite. However, they are also very forward-looking artists. And sometimes they might say, what's your favorite project? And they would say, the next one.
That's a great answer.
Yes.
Do you have any moments with them that you remember really fondly? You worked with them for years. You knew them your whole life. Anything that you can pinpoint that was a wonderful moment, a wonderful memory for you?
Yeah, I'll just choose one, but I was thinking about which one would be the most beautiful. Let's go back to New York in the winter of 2005, when the gates were just starting to be installed. It was probably in January, the beginning of the year. We just got into the park with our raw materials and we had staging areas. And the steel bases were going down and just the orange poles were up without any fabric unfurled. And not even all of them had orange poles. Some of them just had safety pylons so people would see them and not trip. And I was going in the car with the driver, with Christo and with Jeanne-Claude. And their enthusiasm was so gorgeous. I mean, just yelling. Look at that. Look at that. Look. I mean, pointing. Christo, his favorite phrase was literally that. Look at that. Mm-hmm. And he would point out the window. Look at that. So happy, happier than every kid on Christmas morning, seeing his baby coming to life and Jeanne-Claude beaming ear to ear. And I have a wonderful memory of that.
What a great memory. What a great moment for you. How would you articulate the legacy of Christo and Jeanne-Claude?
Their legacy is a difficult one to perpetuate, being that their most famous works don't exist. They're gone. They were temporary. However, they affected a lot of people, and a large part of their legacy are the other creative people who were affected by them, who are friendly with them, who made work and continue to make work. There are art professors who still teach about them. There are books. There's a case study that's brought back once in a while at Harvard Business School on how they made their projects. There are pieces going to museums, which is a huge part of our job now in the foundation, is to perpetuate the legacy. And we hope to continue to help museums make exhibitions, lend works, donate works. And we have a chance to finish one last project according to Christo's will. And it would be a permanent sculpture. We don't know if it can ever happen, but it's been allowed in Christo's will. It's fully engineered, and it was for a large sculpture called the mastaba. And it was planned for a very specific part of the desert in the United Arab Emirates. We don't know if we'll ever be able to do it, because Christo and Jeanne-Claude couldn't do it in their lifetime, but we have some good inroads with people in the art world in the Middle East, and we'll see. We'll see if we can. That would be a nice part of their legacy, to have one permanent large-scale sculpture somewhere in the world that could be visited. It's not what you think of when you think of Christo and Jeanne-Claude and their temporary nature of their work, but it's something.
But you seem to have the tenacity they had, so I wouldn't be surprised if we do see that.
You're very optimistic, and thank you. Yes, and we don't put all our eggs in one basket. We try and do all these other things, the exhibitions and the catalogs, and I know that's all very sleepy stuff to a lot of people, but we have to also understand the artists are no longer with us.
But your foundation work is very important.
Super important. We have a great board, luckily, a very diverse board of people who knew them, cared about them, understand the work, and are very supportive of us, who are also the staff.
Jonathan, thank you so much for talking with us today about Christo and Jeanne-Claude. You've been listening to Art Bytes, a podcast from the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art. I'm Kathleen Layton. We'll see you next time.